Hello, everyone. Welcome to Open Air presented by the Harvey B. Gantt Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm Dexter Wimberly, and I'm incredibly excited about today's guest. Combining collage with mixed media, Deborah Roberts' figurative works depict the complexity of Black subjecthood, redefine beauty, and critique ideals and stereotypes. Exploring themes of race, identity, and gender politics, Roberts is renowned for creating semi-autobiographical portraits of African American girls and boys, primarily through her distinctive use of collage. Roberts imbues her figures with agency, thus providing them with unique and unfixed identities pointing towards their complex inner and outer lives. Deborah Roberts was born in 1962 and is based in Austin, Texas. Her work has been included in numerous exhibitions, including Multiplicity, Blackness in Contemporary American Collage at the Frisch Art Museum in Nashville, A Superlative Palette, Contemporary Black Women Artists at the Harvey B. Gantt Center in Charlotte, Deborah Roberts, I'm at the Contemporary Austin in Texas, Deborah Roberts, If They Come at Stephen Friedman Gallery in London, and Deborah Roberts, The Evolution of Mimi at Spelman Museum in Atlanta, Georgia, among others. Her work is included in several public collections, including Block Museum of Art, the Brooklyn Museum, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and the Perez Art Museum in Miami, the Pizzuti Collection, the Studio Museum in Harlem, and the Whitney Museum of American Art. Without further ado, let's welcome Deborah Roberts to today's Open Air.
Hey, how are
How are you?
you? I'm well,
I'm
thank
great.
you.
Well, first and foremost, I want to thank you for joining us today. I know you have an incredibly busy schedule, and I've been wanting to do this with you for a very long time, so I'm incredibly honored. I would like to just take a moment, to kind of hand it over to you. And I've read, a version of your bio. I assume that most people joining us today are familiar with your work or curious enough to have done some research on their own. But maybe you can, start off by telling us a little bit about, who Deborah Roberts is in your own words.
Wow, that's deep. Well, I think if I was to say how I would best describe myself as a visionary, I am a person, a humorist. I mean, I love humor. I will say that, but I also believe in human beings. I believe that there's good people inside of all of us, and I guess my goal is somehow through my art is to capture that good part of you and have a dialogue with that person, to in order for us to see each other as humans capable of love and respect. Um, I don't know. I'm a person who loves art. I love the process of creating art. I love to read. It's a lot of stuff. It's a lot that makes me
Yeah,
ticked.
yeah. Well, what you're describing to me is sort of a full person that has a life and interests beyond the creative sort of practice of making artwork.
Mm-hmm.
Tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about the journey you've been on. I would normally try to have these conversations be a bit chronological, but I prefer, I have various different topics I'd love to explore with you, but tell us a little bit about the journey you've been on the past, say, 15 years or so of your career. I mean, I'm sure it's been a
Right.
wild ride, a lot of
It has
exciting.
been around.
But can you
Yeah.
talk about some of the highlights and things that have gotten you really enthusiastic about being an artist, and also maybe a couple of the things that have, you know, challenges or things that are of concern to you?
Right. I would say, I mean, 15 years is a good start because that's when I think my life really started to change some. I guess around 2008, I went to the San Francisco Art Institute. At that point, I really realized that I needed something more than I was receiving in my community, and not just as an artist. My art has started to change. I didn't really understand what was happening, and I decided, I guess in 2005, to let it happen. By 2008, I needed more scholarship. I knew there was some deeper things that I wanted to talk about, but I didn't have the words or the knowledge to do it. I went to the Art Institute, then I went to Syracuse University, where I got my MFA, and I was a fellow, and it was a 3-year program in a very, very cold place. which allows you to really dig deep into your work and your practice. And while I was there, I really, 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 that's where I think I really, really got into this idea of literature and how that could infuse my work. Fast forward, I've just been doing the collages. I guess in 2017, I think I went to New York, had a show at Volta Art Fair, and did my gallery, Art Palace Gallery, and everything just blew up. Boom, been working 40 years, 30, 40 years, and then all of a sudden, everybody knew who I was, and a lot of great things happened from there. I think what artists want is that people know who they are, to create works that touch people, to tell the story that you want to tell. A black child is my protagonist in my work, and how does that relate to people treating black children as grown adults? I wanted to talk about that, so I couched my argument and that idea of beauty and what that meant for black children. So that I think was different than what other people were doing out there at the time. And so it's been a wild ride. It's been up and down from the Guggenheim to all sorts of stuff. But I think what people don't tell you in that whole ride is that you always have to be at the top of your game. And that if you take one little misstep, and the work that you put out sometimes can cause a whole, uh, you know, domino effect on your work. So there's a lot of pressure. But I love being an artist. I love scholarship. I love reading. Before we did this, I just got back from Europe, and I was reading the Little Book of Solitude, and it was Friedrich Nietzsche is one of my favorite theorists, and reading what he was talking about solitude, and how you it can work for you and not work against you, and that was perfect. And so I was like, okay, this is perfect for this conversation. I'm going to talk about this little book. And so the good parts of being a successful artist now is, wait, I want to say, I feel like I always was a successful artist. I just didn't have any money, and that was tough. But but I think the great part of being able to sell works and to live on your work, to sell your work, is I'm able to do more research, which is really important to me, to break the work down, to figure it out. I went to Germany, to Amsterdam. I'm going to Cape Town. I'm doing all this research on how the black body is seen in the world, you know, both past, present, and future. And that's huge. And so I think, had I not, had the success, I wouldn't been able to afford to go and to meet different people and to talk about my practice. Yeah, that's the plus
Thank you.
stuff.
So, given the timeline you described, so you would have started your, new venture into scholarship in your 40s.
Yes.
Um, and
Mm.
so a lot of artists, by the time they get into their 40s, might decide, well, I'm grown. I know everything I need to know, or they don't have the humility, perhaps, or even the intellectual curiosity to decide that undergirding their work with scholarship and additional knowledge would be helpful. What gave you the strength and the focus to do that at such a later stage in your life?
Well, like I said, I really, when you start talking about the black body, I mean, you look at Cornel West, the reader, and he has a whole essay on black sexuality and how the body is seen throughout the world. And when you started understanding that that fight with Ron Artest and with the Indiana Pacers, and he went into the audience, and CNN played it, 100 times that weekend. That has more to do with him being perceived as some out of control, raging black, strong, animalistic man, instead of someone who was resting on a table, and someone threw a cup of ice in his face, and that caused him to react. So what the world was seeing and what I was drawing, it didn't line up. So I needed to do more in scholarship in order to figure out how can I talk about these things in which people can see the work, see what I'm saying, see black people as individuals, not this monolithic idea. So I couldn't do it on my own. Couldn't do it in that little room and in my off my kitchen. I needed to go somewhere and have dialogue with people.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that that's so important because even from a curatorial standpoint, and this is something that I've grappled with over the past couple of decades, is that you need to see what other people have done and read what other people have written to test your ideas against history, test your ideas against
Absolutely.
intellectual, to not fall into the trap of believing that you're the first one to think of something, right? Which
That's
is sort
right.
of like,
Absolutely.
and that's the trap of youth, right? The average that and not to be disparaging, but I spend time around young people because my children and their friends. The average 18 and 19-year-old kind of thinks they know 10 times more than they actually know, right? And
I know.
it's not until you're older where you realize how much of a gap there is between what you know and what you what you think what you think you know.
Right.
But that kind of brings me back to something you mentioned earlier in this conversation. You mentioned, grown adults, how children are treated like grown adults, Black children in particular.
Yes.
And that's something that struck a chord with me because of my own experiences growing up, in New York City in the 80s, 90s, and kind of dealing with, how police were reacting to teenagers and things like that. What was the impetus for you to make children the protagonists in your work, and how people responded to that outside of like the commercial success that you've had, and we'll talk about that as well, but how people respond to that on a community level?
Well, it's one of the things I did when I talk about the scholarship, and also just being artist who understands. I've always done children and adults in my work, especially my paintings. But when I was in at Syracuse, and I had a lot of time, like I said, to think, I thought about what other artists were saying. We black women, we talk about beauty, we talk about hair, we talk about our body, how we are perceived in the world, how we are magnified, no sexual beings, no you know, video beauty, things like that. So most artists, black women artists, talk about that. So one of the things I noticed is that no one was talking about when did it start? When do we have to put up our dukes to start fighting for our own beauty? And it starts so early. It starts incredibly early, more than black girls, especially more than their peers. And so when I started thinking about that, and then how my aunts and all those people, the church ladies, were teaching me how to be a young lady, and how to be a woman, how to be a black woman. And I said, you know what? That's what I'm going to talk about. And I just found, I remember my little 8-year-old self, and that's what the image started off with, Little Debbie. And I just started from there and started collaging from there. What are some of the things that I went through? What are things that people, and you don't need the internet to tell you. Life will give you plenty of stuff to talk about. I was doing a segment with CNN, and I remember Victor Blackwell. He said, "Well, we're gonna play this when an incident happens. So look," I said, "It's gonna be soon." And right away, there was a little black kid arrested for simply peeing outside because he couldn't wait to get home. And how many people have peed outside but not been arrested, put in a squad car, and put on probation? I mean,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
all. It happened like within 8 days of my segment. You know.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's so much to unpack there, and I think that it's great that you found that path in your creative journey to kind of bring something new to the conversation. I mean, I think that we're in a hell, you could say we're always in an interesting time,
Right.
but we're but we're certainly in one now, and I think that being a black artist in this day in this time comes with a lot of new expectations, a lot of new different kinds of challenges. I mean, a lot of the artists that we might talk about who paved the way for the art world as we know it today in the 50s and 60s, they dealt with a whole set of problems, like very overt problems that we thought at some point it kind of dissipated. And now so many of those problems have reared their heads again.
Right.
And there's a lot of chatter. There's like a double whammy of chatter happening now in the art world. One of them is sort of macro, and it's like, oh, you read a lot of stories now about this contraction in the art world, how institutions and collectors are pulling back. So you have that one story, and then you have
Right.
this other story that is circulating around this idea that figurative work, particularly black figurative work, is running up against sort of like a saturation in the market, et cetera. So you have, I pay attention to these things, but also I look at them with a very sort of, I wouldn't call it skepticism, but I'm always careful about believing what I read, particularly in the
Right.
media.
Right.
Um,
I
that's me
agree.
coming at it from the perspective of a curator, to some extent, administrator, right? Because I don't make artwork, right? So for you as an artist, how's this moment feeling for you now? Like what what's motivating you? What's frustrating you? What's exciting you? What's pissing you off?
Right. Well, I'm actually going to talk about this in my jump in, but the idea of a market correction that always happens. I mean, one of the reasons why that triggered me into school in 2007, 2008 was George Bush presidency. I mean, 2 terms. I mean, I wasn't selling any work, and it just really went down, and I had to go. So the market changes. It goes to this like dip, and it comes back up. All different types of styles of work go in and out. That's just history. I mean, you can chart that any way you look at it. But this idea of reappropriation black fatigue in the sense of black figuration has really just like what the hell? I mean, black fatigue wasn't about figuration. It was about black people being tired of carrying all the load, and that we were tired of just being taken advantage of. So my point is this: I'm going to always do the type of work that I do. If people move away from figuration, that's fine with me. I can't follow trends. I can't. I'm my own artist. I don't want to be that type of artist who's looking for what's hot and then copy that. Copy that thing. Always searching out to those collectors, whatever they looking forward to. There are some artists who have made tremendous amount of big strides during this time of celebration of black artists and black art. There are some artists also who have not done that work, who have not pushed forward their practice, who are just kind of phoning it in. And a lot of those artists are suffering right now because the market is moving away as it always does, and they're wondering, what's happening to me, what's happening to my work. I don't think. I think since the time of Michelangelo, people have always talked about figurative work or painting being on the way out. I don't think that will ever happen. I think we need to see ourselves in a certain type of form on a painting, in a book, some sort of image of human self. So I'm not worried about it. I never expected this to happen to me. So if it ended at this day at 8 p.m. tonight, I would be okay. I would be very thankful because I never thought it was going to happen. I always dreamt of it, I hoped for it, hope with it, believing, but I never thought it was happening. So I'm happy, So um, I don't think, I don't know. It's very interesting. I mean, it's 5 articles so far, and they all been well. 2 have been very positive. 3 have not been, and I don't know what that is. All of a sudden, to kick black
I
art
have,
out.
yeah, well, This is your interview, not mine, but I'm going to tell you what I think.
All right.
Um, so many years ago, before I had my feet underneath me professionally as a curator, I just felt like somebody who was on the outside looking in, right?
Right.
And this is going back to maybe, and again, it's that 15-year arc. So this is going back 2010,
Right.
2009, around that time. And I remember what people were excited about and talking about then in the contemporary art world. And it was not the things they're excited and talking about in the past 3 or 4 years. It was in a whole different
Right.
art world.
Right.
And you certainly had a lot of artists that had come out of prestigious MFA programs that were getting a lot of visibility. Don't need to name them. We know who we're talking about. A lot of artists who have gone on to become incredibly significant Black artists of this generation. And I always felt that this was driven by a few different factors. One is culture constantly evolves and it shifts and changes. And
Right.
the internet, more specifically social media, really played a role in shaping people's perceptions of the art world in a way that it could have, didn't exist before. But certainly, if you go back to the 80s and 90s, if you were interested in art and artist, you really had to do the work. There was a different level of work you had to do, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You had to go to the shows. You had to go to the artist studios. You could not do this from your sofa. It just wasn't. There was no means of doing that,
Right.
right? And so, in a way, technology, specifically social media, created more players on the field, so to speak, significantly more, perhaps
And it
thousands
shrunk.
more.
It shrunk the world. It all
Yeah,
came together. You was able to see more things. Yeah.
right. Significantly more. Thousands more people could be more casually engaged in the art world, which for
Absolutely.
me is a net positive. But what it also meant was that people could engage in the art world without having much skin in the game.
Right.
You could you could kind of do it casually, which meant that you never knew if the people you were dealing with or interacting with were really committed to the growth and nurturing and cultivating of artists and their lives and careers and all of that stuff, or it was just like another version of something else that's just fun to do, right? Which is, again, fine for people to do that. But I think that what we ended up with is a situation where so much hype and so much sort of like insincere activity just flooded into the art world
Right.
that, and then capital as well, right? Like money, like purely just money flooded into the art world because there were a lot of people just more or less just chasing, flipping or chasing opportunities to just make more
Yeah.
money,
Yeah.
we
Speculating. Yeah.
speculating. That's not sustainable. Like there's never been a time in history where any activities along the lines of what I just described kind of goes on forever. It just doesn't. It just simply
Right.
doesn't. The economy changes, tastes change, people's interests change. Anything that has a hype cycle around it things to shift tends to shift. But there's always what's consistent are the artists who are committed to their work, that remains consistent. The institutions that are committed to community and showing art, that remains consistent. But you always have people that kind of dip in and dip out. And I feel like the media, these articles that I've read, you've mentioned, um, they have to write about something. So
Right.
that's like the other side of it. It's you see one article, then you're going to see another, and then people are writing articles, almost like writing articles about the articles,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
opposed to
Exactly.
even doing like the first research, right? And you get this sort of feedback loop. So those 5 articles about what's happening in Black configuration will become 10 articles, will become 20 articles. It's just the way sort of the media, functions and operates. But I'm of the mind that this will continue in a positive way. There will always be, as you mentioned, there will always be artists, whether they are Black artists or any other ethnicity, there will always be artists dealing with humanity, dealing with the figure, dealing with things that are urgent right now in this time. There'll always be people who feel like they just want to chase the trends. These are things that are just sort of like constant. So it's
Right,
just a matter of
exactly.
like staying focused, right? I think it's about staying focused. A question for you about success. When did you start feeling successful?
When I started feeling successful, um, I guess middle 2017, I was shopping at the store, the grocery store, and I was choosing things without looking at prices. And that was the key. And I remember it happened. And I had, and I was going down and then this, and went by the meat section. You got to buy a whole chicken so you can cut it in 12 pieces, not eight, but 12. And I remember just getting, instead of getting the whole chicken, I was able to get, parts, like a bag of wings and, some legs and, and I didn't have to get a whole chicken and cut into 12 pieces. And it was crazy. I remember going past and I said, okay. And I went on and went shopping. And that was the first time I knew that I had enough money in the bank to take care of that, all of that, because I have had food insecurities and I've had rental insecurities and all those things that when artists approach me and tell me this is happening, I know what it feels like. And so it's not that far gone from me. I definitely understand that.
Yeah, I could
But
relate to I could
yeah,
relate to
go
that
ahead.
fully.
Yeah,
I grew up in a very, very, modest household. It can, financially. So I know what it's like to have to look at things like very, very closely, and then
right,
that change. And it's hard for people who've never had that kind of experience, and millions of people have. So let's be clear. This is not
right,
like it's not rarefied air to be like
right,
looking
exactly.
at prices, right? That's it's unfortunately more common than it should be in that in many ways. But the fact is, if you don't have that experience, it's sort of like hard to know what success is to some extent. I mean, people who've always sort of like had stability, it's hard for them to know like what that turning point is. I mean, like for me, it was when I could automate my bills and I didn't have to like
I know, I know. That's what I tell people all the time. A little personal stuff is that I used to pray in my closet. I had to get everything out of there, anything that would take my attention away from my prayers. And then with the little light coming in the door, I would stuff clothes in it, right? And I would say my prayers. But one of the things I did that I always prayed for was that I didn't have to worry about my bills, my light bill, all my rent, all that was paid for. Um, what I forgot to, um, pray for. I've been a great steward. I've been a good steward, but I think um, there's a lot of drama that comes with the success, and and other people's perspective of what success is and what you're supposed to be doing at that point. Um, my art is always going to come first. Me growing my art, me pushing it forward, me trying to tell the story. That's going to be always, whether people buy it or not. I'm constantly going to do it. I did it in the past, so it's not about whether or not the Guggenheim has a work, whether or not MoMA has a work. I would love for MoMA to have a work. I would love for the work to be in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. All those things I would love. But I also would like more than any of that is that people understand what I'm talking about in my practice, that I'm not a sellout, that I'm putting in the time and the effort to do this, to make you understand that there's a serious problem and we need to face it. And what is happening to children, they don't get to have the same childhood as other kids, and this is why. And what we're going to do to help them have that childhood. And
Mm,
so those type of things are more important than the other stuff. So I'm always going to be doing that. But you have to be careful when you pray about certain things because other things come along with it.
mm,
And and those things. new problem. Amy Sure, we always say more money, more problems. We love that.
It's,
More money, more problems. You know.
well, it's true, and you could trade the word problem with responsibility, with
Right.
expectations, with
Right.
like, you know, all sorts of words that, problems is just a proxy for, right? But
Right.
so here's what we're going to do now. I know we have some images of your work we'll get to in a moment. We had a few questions come in from some of the people who joined us today. So I want to get to those questions and also tell other folks if you're here, you have questions, you can drop them in the chat. So the first question here is that your work often features young Black girls and boys in complex, beautiful ways. What do you hope children see or feel when they look at your art?
I definitely hope that they find the individual in that work. You know, that's why collage was so important because I thought it was this idea that was being pushed out that we were one person. So that's why I do multiple faces. I want you to make a connection with one person, one individual, and that is that part of humanity is what I want to talk about. But also I want the kids to look heroic. I want them to be in a place where people look up to them, be in a place that they never existed, being and it's okay to have a name like Shamika or Tawana or the typical Jamal name and things like that. That those are okay, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's who you are. Those are unique American names. We tend to call them black names, but no, those are American names. They stem from our history. The first act of freedom, was naming. And 1865 was to name our children and to pick a name and so I want kids when they see this word to really understand that I am championing them. I am saying you are important and you should be put on the pedestal just like any other child. And I hope they see that in the work. I really do.
Wonderful, wonderful. We have another question that's come in. Hi, Deborah. I love what you think about your art. Literally, when I first viewed your art, I was reminded of two little girls, Fridia and Claudia, from Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. What are three books you believe everyone should read? That's a tough question on the spot. I don't know if you have three books off the top of your head. So if you want to think about it, that's fine.
Listen. Let me. I always talk about Cornel West. I love Cornel West, but I love pre-Obama Cornel West, not post-Obama Cornel West. I say that everybody needs to read *The Reader* by Cornel West. He has a beautiful essay on Horace Pittman in that book, and he also talked about the black body in that book. Remember, we talked about that earlier. That for me helped me tremendously. I will say Toni Morrison. Oh God, one with Milkman. Oh God, I can't believe I can't think of the name. Um, I know some. Oh, I can't believe it. Toni Morrison. God, I can't believe it. The one with Milkman. The boy. I can't believe I can't think of it.
Think on
He's
it.
gonna
Hey,
make me
well,
get
think
it.
on it, and
Okay,
if you need to
and then
come back to it.
let's see. I'm also gonna say I know why the caged bird sings, but I love that book, but that's not. Um, anything by James Baldwin. I see anything by James Baldwin is a good book to have. I love James Baldwin in a way that he is teaching us still today. If he's to read him is to read him like he has written last week, not 50 years ago, but last week, that he's constantly writing right now.
Mhm.
And it's I would want my work. Well, in a way, I want because all the work we're doing right now is artifact. We are documenting history at this time through our practice, and I would hope that in 100 years, people will say, "I can't believe they lived like that." It's just so archaic to me. I don't want them to think, but it's not going to happen. Just like how James Baldwin's books are living documents. They are a breathing, living They're not dead. They are alive. And what he's talking about, we should be ashamed that it's still happening today.
Indeed.
And I want my work, like I said, 100 years, maybe 150 years when people go back, whatever devices they have and think this and say, wow, They really live like that. I'm so glad it's changed. It was
Right.
important. Why was it so important to fracture the faces to figure out one's humanity? Of course, everybody's the same. Of course, everybody loves one another and treats everybody fairly. That's how could they not? We when we think about enslavement, how can people own another human being? It's just what I mean. How can you do that? How can you put them in a little box and beat them and all the horrible things and own someone and prevent them from learning and all that stuff? Is just so foreign. It's not foreign to us, but you look at that and then you look at the idea of the Holocaust and how people uttered other people and then thought to murder them, to kill them, and all those things that we hope that we have hopefully would go grow past that. So I'm
Mm,
hoping.
mm.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. The book was Song of Solomon.
Yes. Oh my God. Thank you, internet and world out there. I was like, I love that book. I listened to her. I did the audio book, and I did a whole series of works with that book. And the notion that black people can fly. I love it. I love the idea when Milkman takes flight. It's just it's so amazing because you think about black people and the beauty of us and how we can some of us flew back to Africa. The
Yeah.
whole idea of Toni Morrison was just brilliant. She was brilliant.
Well, let's start the slide presentation so we can look at some
Sure.
work and then we can talk about specifics in your process. So this is actually a good place to I can jump back to a question that came in. How do you decide which materials or visual elements to layer in your collages to tell a deeper story about identity?
Right. Everything that I put into work has some type of significance. The white space, the white gaze, how we are centered in whiteness all the time. And this particular Shanika and Grace, how this is the first time the work started to blow up. They started to take up more space on the canvas. And I love this idea of these two girls just sitting there, friends, and just standing and their own beauty and their power. It was real important that I put on kind of like that little muscle shirt to kind of show. At that time, I think there was a lot of talk about Michelle Obama and her arms and things like that, and the power and the beauty and the strength of young black girls, and how our bodies are different, not distorted, just different, you know. And so I just love the innocence of putting one's hand on the other shoulder. It's a sisterhood that exists between black women and black girls that's wonderful. And then I love the Afro puffs. Um, I didn't. My mom didn't let us have Afro puffs, but I wanted them. And by the time I could do it on my own, I was too old for Afro puffs. So I just love the whole idea of that work. Stripes are very important in my work. I sometimes I talk about mass incarceration, and this particular piece I did, and it was more about being an American and how different that was for some people. I put the cherries on the bottom of her skirt, talking about black virginity and how easily it is sometimes robbed of black girls. I did the idea of the flowers and the red flowers and the purple flowers, of beauty and brutality that exist sometimes on the same plane and at the same time. So everything within the work is speaking to the audience. It's just asking you to unpack it, to look broadly beyond. And that's why it was so important to use children. Children are non-threatening to people. And when I mean that, I don't mean like a bunch of little black kids on a bus and talking loud. I'm talking about the innocent that exists in children tend to make people's defenses come down. So there is a dialogue that can happen that's allowed to happen. And especially I find the most innocent face and then I pile on top of that with my collages. Hmm.
Where are you looking at for inspiration? Are you looking in magazines? Are you looking online? Are you looking at photographs? Are you
Yeah,
looking at other?
I do a lot of research. I for a long time I source imagery from Haiti. Something that is uniquely beautiful about those children who are living in poverty. You would think that there was no happiness, no joy, but it is. It exists there in ways that are so amazingly beautiful. I source imagery from the past, from the like I said, from the present. There's a four-pronged approach to my work: art history, American history, black culture, and pop culture. All those things exist in that work in different ways, and so I source imagery throughout. You know, those four things.
Let's advance to the next image, but I'm going to talk about those four things again. Can you list them again? So it's
It's pop culture, black culture that is just in pop culture. That is pop culture, to be honest. American history and black history. And so the reason why I make them black history and American history separate, even though they are still intertwined, that there are something uniquely things about black people that are our history that have brought forward through generation of telling and knowing that is not necessarily shared amongst other races. Let's say this: I can go in a room and it could be totally everybody, but you and I are the only black people in that space. I can go and look you in the face and either do this, give you the nod, or something that you know exactly what I'm talking about. I don't have to say nothing else. I'm acknowledging your presence in this space, and my presence in this space as the only, this uniquely thing that bonds us. And so those things, that's when I talk about Black history. There's more, but I don't try to give it all out.
right. I know. I hear you. I hear you. No, but thanks for sharing that. That opens up a whole lot of like clarity and complexity
Mhm.
as well. That's great. So the work we're looking at now, can you share some information about this work?
Yeah, this is notorious. This is because notorious. At this point, when I did this work, that's when the notion of Karen came out. When people were finding black people at rest, at play, at reading, at whatever, and challenging them their idea of them in that space. And so I think this one, I don't know, I don't think this was at rest. This might be at rest, and it was notorious because how dare you rest in this space of whiteness. And so I wanted to do the kid with his Jordans. Well, they were not Jordans, I don't know. I try not to do brands because I
Right,
got
right.
caught up in in a Nike guy, and I tried to sell him Adidas with some Adidas shoes, and I can't buy that. So I try not to do brands anymore. But this idea of resting a young person, head is down, just wide open, free, and just existing in space, as if that he was placed on the pedestal, and the pedestal is not no longer there, but he exists there in that space. And I wanted to kind of touch the floor, the base of it, and then lift him up in that space.
When you're making your work, are you starting with sketches? And you don't have to give away all the secrets, but I'm just kind of
Oh, dude, I
you know
won't give him away. I've done
you
that
know
before.
obviously you have this space that you are engaging with, and so are you making decisions based on a sketch that you would have done in advance, or is it more intuitive and sort of freestyle?
It's more freestyle, but if it's something I have to talk about. So I've been, like I said, I did all this research on the black body and how it exists in the world. And so once I get the idea and what I want to do, all the work follows that. And so like when I did four of these works with Notorious, the series Notorious. And so it was easy to come up with the idea because it was happening in real time in the world. There were women, you couldn't walk the dog and try to look at a bird, and I'm being attacked. I'm being attacked. You was in the dorm and you was in the common area. What are you doing here? You don't belong to school. So many different things that were happening. It was really easy for me to come up with the idea. Life is going to always life. And that, like I said, is always going to be multiple ways for me to get my work. I was in the 16th Chapel, God, a few days ago, and I was doing some sketches, and I'm going to use one of the sketches that I did in my upcoming work. And it wasn't finished. It was just, something I got at the gift store, and just a little drawing. And I'm going to use that pose. And I was like, yeah, I know where I'm going to use that in my upcoming work. That type of freedom that exists, but it's going to be a child in that same type of pose. It's going to be beautiful.
Yeah, amazing. Let's advance to the next image. We had a question that came in. Do you have any rituals or habits that help you stay creative?
N- Uh, no, I don't. I mean, like I said, the news always give me inspiration. I guess one of my habits is I I read a lot, and I don't finish books sometimes, and that makes me mad because I it's always so much good stuff. And I when I do my art, I always have a book on. I always tell people, what's her name, Hannah Jones, Nicole Hannah Jones. I tried to listen to the 1619 Project. I was so angry every time I couldn't do work. I mean, that was the only time I had to turn it off because people. Oh my God, that book. So I listen to a lot of audiobooks and while I'm doing art, and it's really especially I know what can get me going if I have to be really political in the work or I have to have a soft hand in the work. I re-listen to books, because you always miss stuff. So I guess that's my main, ritual is to have me a great book on. I love mysteries too, so sometimes I get some mystery books in there, but mainly just black authors and stuff like that.
Thanks for sharing that. When did you start introducing the literal word American into your work? I love that. It's always interesting the juxtaposition of seeing American, on a strong black body and how that kind of creates this sort of like cognitive moment for a lot of people.
Right. Because our patriotism is always in doubt. No one believes that we're patriots, that we love this country just like everybody else. Our families, our blood of our people are in this land. So this idea of challenging my patriotism and this upside down, a lot of these works were brought in Germany. I don't know why. Some German museums brought a lot of these upside down American pieces, which is kind of weird. Kind of made me feel funny. But this idea of it's the promise of America is not promised to everyone. It is not. The framers of the Constitution didn't see black people as whole beings. So this idea that we have spilled so much blood fighting for a country and at times don't see us as part of its own people to protect. And so when I do the upside down America, I said it is upside down. I've started using the the reverse image of the penny. In God we trust. At the oh, now you're saying talking about giving it away. I'm gonna stop right there because this is so important in this next work, and I don't want to start saying a bunch of
All right,
business.
let's go to let's go to the next work.
Okay. Yeah, okay. This is I love this idea of I call it invoking, but it's some of the root of God, I can't think of the title of it. But my girls should have sent that to you so that you could have them. I should have did it too, but I love that this piece. Um, I think it just sold at Miami last year, and the idea of that hand just placing in between the face and saying, "This is me." And this image, I use both male and female figures of images because when kids are little boys and little girls at a certain age, they have both features of boys and girls. And this idea of this this thing that I heard last year that kind of upset me a little bit about saying that black women are too masculine. too aggressive. This idea somehow not making us feminine in the ways that we have to be masculine in order to survive and take care of ourselves and our family. Black women, 67% have postgraduate degrees or working strong. So what is masculine about that? You know, so this idea of clothing in and focusing on my face, who I am, not my body, just my face. And then I put this little educational, the idea of, the diamond shapes and the argyle and that in my work. And yeah, I really love this work. Just really special piece.
So talk a little bit about fashion. Let's advance to the next image. So talk about the fashion influences in your work. Are you, well, maybe less so in this than the prior work, but nevertheless, curious about the decision making around the clothing.
Right. Well, I do a lot of bright colors in my work, and I talked about that because kids, especially when you're making those early decisions about who you are and how you want to enter the world as a young girl, your sense of color and style is so different, and it's very expressive. And I wanted to do that in the works, um, and so that's why you see a lot of colors in my work, but when I was in Amsterdam, I found the book, a color book, and I'm not gonna go grab it, but it is perfect. It is, and I'm gonna talk about this in my thing, is that it helps you if you have a problem with color and how color works and how to create these wonderful pieces. This book helps you. And I found it only in first just in the block colors, and volume two has painting. These are how paintings are created. These are how colors are done, and it's beautiful. And I'm apply that to the new work that I'm doing. And this work, this is one of my black paintings that I early on started doing in 2020. I did some before that, but in particular, I reversed the idea of whiteness being, how can whiteness still control a black space? The first thing you see are the white tennis shoes. Whiteness is always present, and we have to figure out a way to eliminate that so it's not, while it's present, it doesn't absorb the whole image. And this is what I was talking about, the deposition of her face and the white tennis shoes, and that her body is just a chalk line, of who she is. And she has gold nails on, which I talk about in my work. And you see this all the black images or any of my children, the gold fingernails is, sign of currency, that the value of the black body, whether it's in mass incarceration, whether it's in real estate, and different ways in which they still keep us bonded, and chain, not in chains so much, but in different ways.
But mentally, mental
Yeah,
bondage in some way.
yeah,
Yeah,
mental
yeah.
bondage. Yeah.
Let's advance to the next image. So this, I think, incorporates a lot of the things that I was just asking about in terms of like decisions around fashion and color
Hmm.
and positioning. In this particular work is taking up most of the paper or the canvas, and and sort of a pose that we're all familiar with, this sort of I am present, I am here pose. Um, so obviously, collage, you're standing on the shoulders of some giants that have,
Yeah.
in collage. And how have you navigated that in terms of making sure that from a technical standpoint, you're differentiating yourself from your predecessors?
Right, right. It's so important that people understand, and hopefully I can really talk about this later in the year, how collage is a medium. It is just like painting is a medium, collage is a medium. And there are several artists who I owe homage to, who have come before me, who do the medium of collage. But if you look at the subject matter, it is different. But sometimes with collage, you don't do that. You just say, "Oh, it's collage. It must be Romeo Bearden. Oh, it's collage. It must be Hannah Hawk." And it's not. Hannah Hawk, the way she's a German artist doing Dadaism, she did apply both men and female imagery, but she used her collage as agency to gain power and to talk about issues of black identity, in the sense that she felt like there were artists going over to Africa, taking African imagery and coming back by Western standards and say, "Oh, look what I created." And so she talked a lot about that in her practice. And while, like I tell people, why I love Ramir Bearden is that he talked about the Conjure Woman. He talked about, um, urban living. He talked about jazz. He talked about so many things. You don't see that in my work. It is the medium of collage, not one person. You look at Matisse and the way that he cut out imagery and color and beauty. It is not the same as the work that I do. It's the different. It's the medium, and that's one of the things that I want people more to focus on. That is the medium and not the image, because there are people who are painters. There's Vincent Van Gogh, who's a painter. There's Michelangelo, who was a painter. They both doing different types of work, but they're still painting.
Right.
And the same way collage needs to be seen in that sense, that it is a medium in which people work in. And there's thousands of artists who do different types of collage, and we all have to celebrate. Some people don't even put human, people. They do it with animals. They do it with flowers. So I think while we celebrate all the people who've come before us, we just also need to talk about collage being a medium and not an individual person.
Right. Agreed. Completely agreed. Let's advance to the next image. In the interest of time, um, although we'll have this image on screen here, I want to talk about your current projects. Like, what are you working on right now that you're excited about that you can share?
Oh my God, I'm working on a series of works. I have a big curatorial visit on Thursday that talks about that. That's my research last year. I took the last year off to really do research, to really read, to really start unpacking things that I've been skirting around, and I I started to work on that stuff this year, and it is coming along. Your gallery always pat you on the back and say, "This is really amazing work," because they want, "Can I sell it? Let me get it out here." And my stuff is no. Hold on to it till I get to the end of it. Whatever the end may be, that's where I'm going. And I'm excited about it because I'm working, you can see a little bit with, I'm working proportion, but I'm really, really exaggerating proportion in a way that I'm asking people to really come into the work and, or to be pushed out of the work too. Um, so that I'm really excited about. I'm doing both paper, canvas, panel, all sorts of things to sculpture, in ways. I'm not doing video because my videos suck. One of the things you have to know, your strengths is your weaknesses, and nobody wants to see a video that I created. I promise you. So the idea of just doing other things is really important. Hmm.
Well, that makes me that makes me laugh because I think that in the past decade, I've seen a lot of artists who, and again, you should express yourself creatively however you see fit. But I have seen a lot of artists go into different mediums and put it out into the world, perhaps prematurely,
Yeah.
just to show other dimensions of themselves. But maybe some of that is, as you mentioned, there's a lot of commercial pressure. For people who don't know, it's a lot of commercial pressure that artists get put under when you're working with galleries. And there's this idea of like more and more and more. Can you make more? Can you do more?
Right, right, right.
Uh,
And that,
I,
yeah, that's
yeah,
one of the things yeah, excuse me. That's one of the things I was talking about, is that there is a lot of pressure to put out more work. But you have to stop it. And you have to stop and put out good work. And I will not put out crappy videos and just so that I can try to tell a story that's untellable through my videos, you know?
right. Absolutely.
Hmm.
Well, all great conversations go by quickly, and unfortunately, ours has come to the end today, Deborah.
I know.
What's funny is that I've known. of your work for a very long time. We've been in some of the same spaces, but we've never really spent a lot of time together. So, I'm hoping that at some point this year, or certainly by next year, I'm able to visit you in your space.
I would
Maybe
love
we'll do it
that.
together down the line. But I really appreciate you taking the time today. I've been trying to make this happen for like a year, so I'm so
I know
happy
you
that we
have. I know. I know.
I'm so happy that we finally got it done. Just want to wish you a really wonderful day and thank you so much for everything you've shared with us. At the end here, I usually say some final words, but I don't want to cut you off abruptly. So if there's any final thing you'd like to share before we conclude today, please do.
No, I just said thanks for having me, giving me the opportunity to talk about my practice, and that you have to just stick with it. It is not a sprint; it's a marathon. So just keep working at your practice. You'll get there, everyone.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you. Uh, the Gantt Center's goal is always to provide programs that inform and inspire. The support of viewers like you allows the Gantt to expand its reach and further develop programs like Open Air. Lend your support to the Gantt Center by visiting ganttcenter.org/donate. Also, be sure to like and subscribe to this channel for future programs and other video content updates. I want to thank you all for joining us for another great conversation. Thank you to Deborah Roberts, and we look forward to next month's Open Air with Alvin Jacobs. Everyone, have a wonderful evening. Good night.